And it went well, and there's more, but the power to pivot where you're moving, what you're trying, who you're meeting. Does that make sense? Did that come up? That's great. So I'm gonna share, and this is a painting that Pam shared with us that it's fine. Pam shared a painting in that curiosity conversation, and I thought that would be a good way just to start our day with a little art. So. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, this is a painting that I did. It's probably been a couple years now. And it's about roughly 3.5 feet wide by 4 feet long. And their initial title of it was Hopeful Desperation. And the intention behind it, though, is that this battle between when you have something that you don't want to let go of, and then that as that battle continues, sometimes, and you can see the tension between the frame and the piece in the middle, and the desperation of just trying to hold on to this. But then as that picture of what we're trying to hold on to, it's like initially it was a memory. So our memories fade. And as much as we want to hold on to them, sometimes they fade, or only parts of them stay with us. And so it becomes, you can see how strong that the hold on is. So then sometimes our life is no longer about the memory, but about the grasp of holding on to whatever it is we're trying to hold on to. So when we were talking about pivoting, and I've never really liked the title, it doesn't quite grasp what I wanted it to do. And so when we were having our conversation about pivoting and the power of, or the privilege of pivoting, which was something like not everybody has that privilege to be able to change the course of their life. And that's that we support, that's often the case, the control is not theirs. But then also the pivoted. So everyone else, it's their choice and they want to pivot, but what if I don't want to, and how does that affect me? So as we were talking about it, this piece just kept popping up, and I'm like, I wonder if they could help me with the title. So that's why I put it out there and said, we had some really great conversation. Here's what my intention was. Is there any way you guys can help me with a better title?
And have you gotten any better titles?
I got 2 responses. Okay. So yes, because nobody gave me a title, which is what I asked for. And you all gave me more to think about, which is not what I asked for. But it's been very enlightening. So one response is actually for somebody who is a parent and her kid has a disability, and what she shared was that it was as a great visualization to what it feels like as a parent, and kind of trusting people and community and the people around her, but then also wanting to hold on at the same time. And this idea of letting go and holding on at the same time, and that constant battle that is always happening for her. And then Tim gave me all kinds of other things about basically you came to clouds, which is my subject matter oftentimes, but the clouds and how they kind of are free form and moving, but they also can be dangerous. And we think there's so much freedom in where they're going and how they're moving, but really they're only working within the system or the rules of nature of what is set up for them to do, which I thought was cool if we're thinking about change in our system today.
Yes, that is what it meant to me, was that in a sense, people that we support and their families and the community, if we can start thinking of the community as colleagues in our work, they have this freedom to form, to shape, to flow. And one of the questions is, how can we as a system provide enough guidelines to ensure safety, to make sure that those supports get funded, but to also let freedom happen, right? So it's just something to think about. We're big fans of creative experiences that help us give more metaphor to our work. So we thought we'd start today with a little art, and just want to point out that what we're looking for in your neck of the woods here are people that have the wisdom already. You know, we really believe that the wisdom is always in the room that we need. And so we've heard from Aaron back in February. He told us about all the great ways that he's thinking about his program and how he's helping to spring some people out with the support of you good people here and the community. We also heard from Rachel back in June about her work with her family and her neighborhood. And that is bearing fruit in lots of interesting, good ways. And so now we're hearing from Pam and her creative way of thinking about how our systems interact with the people that we're supporting and how we might consider that. So you've got some really interesting people on the team, and there's so many more of them. What's the population of Fairfield County? I mean, anybody know? But just in this room, just on your team, and then if you think about the big community, you've got so many allies out there. Just how do we get them on, right? So, thank you, Pam. Beautiful. How much is it?
165, David will say. No, 165,000.
155,000.
That's not my price, but I'll take his.
Great. Thank you, Pam. Beautiful. Thank you, Jamie, for sharing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, that was the population.
Oh, 165,000. Much better. I was like, geez, Pam.
And I mean, I said it wasn't mine.
David won the lottery. I'm banking on you.
It's worth that for sure.
Okay, well, we are gonna start, so today is gonna be about change, if you are getting that theme, and some of the stuff that we've done to change. But we wanna kind of start and give you guys a chance to kind of consider for yourself. We've all done it. We've all had to change. We've used the word pivot sometimes, you know, like you're doing one thing and you've got to change and go in another direction. So we're gonna give you guys a few minutes to think about a time you had to change. This can be personally, professionally, it's okay, either one. But just kind of consider, what did that change ask of you? What did you have to do? What did it mean to you in your life? And what are some of the supports you needed to make that change? And what if you hadn't done it? So those are a lot of questions in there, but.
And
we need to
repeat
some of
them,
those.
but remember, we also have gift cards, so people
Yes.
that participate will get a raffle ticket. And we'll hand those out as,
Yeah. I've got them, I'm ready.
All right, what are the
Yes.
questions again, Brittany?
Okay. Think of a time you had to change. What did it ask of you? What supports did you need? What did it mean to your life? And what if you hadn't done it? Those are your questions. So if you can break up into groups of about 3, and we're gonna give you, I'm not looking at that clock.
No.
6 minutes, I think, well, just to talk real quick, a couple minutes each. Okay.
There's 10 people on.
I'm not allowed to do it.
So it was like
We're not gonna.
I literally had to become a new person.
We get 5 probably.
Physically and mentally, and I'm gonna
Go down.
there's no more just getting up and going places when I want.
You want me to? Okay.
I now have to cook meals, which sucks. As far as support, my husband does a lot. No, we support in the past, so there's a lot more he has to do now. And then there's just some village people that come around you when you have a kid that are willing to help. Not even just family, just neighbors, anyone. I have soccer games for him, coaches, random people will watch him, play with him if I need to run to the bathroom. If I didn't have that big change in my life, I was working at Franklin County because I came to Fairfield County because it's 2 minutes from my house. I have a lot more money and a lot less bills and a lot less responsibilities and probably a lot less stress, but also a lot less love in my heart because I have the ability to say nicely. And I have more emotions. I probably have those emotions. questions, I just didn't really surface, I had a question. That's mine. I covered all of it. It's it's a very easy one, it's my neck card. I started, January 2nd, so. Yeah, he was, yeah. Crazy. Holy crap. Okay, next. You're right. It's a big change.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably when I shift to college, it's probably like the biggest and best thing. I grew up in a private Christian school. And then I like worked out with college with somebody else. And I was trying to do freak out rooms, but it wasn't ours. I think like people were like moving inside. I was like, I don't okay, it doesn't matter. Like it'll be fine. But I was like, told Tim about it. I was like, I'm freaking out. Like I'm upstairs. Like I don't know what to do. I tried to put him back. It didn't like. It was just kind of crazy. Let's get started and get moved. You know. Yeah, I'll tell you. So you'll close all that.
When I'm less concerned about doing what's right for them and just doing what's right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know. I don't see my settings. I don't have a timer.
I just
You know, like everybody's doing their account. I'm always just like thinking about my phone.
A big thing for me. And to the words, I think it's like my friends.
That's hilarious. Isn't that funny? So I was gonna say, I was like, I don't know if I had that, like, I've seen it. I think you could like program.
Kids became interesting after I changed.
So we'll go with
He got the person.
I think it's a trend, right? It just should close it. The What I'm wondering about
We were just talking about that one. Like, I've never spent Christmas with chance or anything like that.
Okay, so you got about a minute to go.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's.
If they could see it.
He's like, I'm scary. I love my family, don't get me wrong, but I'm okay. The facial part, like if I could move to a state, be okay. He would always struggle with that. That makes sense.
It's hard. I feel like the expense too of going all the way to California during the holidays. I was like, are you ready to come back yet? We're like, done with this phase. I was stuck in California last week. Yeah, luckily I worked Fair Day, so I like had an extra day to teach, but yeah, I was stuck. Not because of weather. Well, they said it was weather, but it was the whole myself.
Okay, are they back? Okay, we could bring it back together. We got our. Is there a way to not see us?
I think if I were sitting in your all's row.
Yeah, I don't like making no eye
Yeah, it's just like that doesn't
Just
exist.
looking everywhere but that.
Like see the people. That's fine. All right, let me know if anybody looks like Okay, so
We can put a paper.
just to remind you of how we like to do this is just to speak about what you heard from someone else, to lift up somebody else's voice. And for this, you guys might want to look for if you've noticed sort of themes, like so what, if there were some common things that you noticed about when you were changing and what it meant and what you needed. So if you have any of that to share, we'd love to hear it, some of that wisdom that you guys have. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was gonna talk about Catherine. So she talked about when she went to college was a big change in her life. And she is from California, she grew up there. But she went to school in West Virginia. So she grew up in a pretty conservative family, and so she went to an all Christian school, like through kindergarten, middle school, high school, all of it. So she went to a college that wasn't based around that, and that's quite a large change. And she said that she was just, it was so structured all her life growing up that when she did go to college, she had a lot more freedom to think how she wanted to think in a way, and it was different. She said she became a lot kinder and nicer because of that. And during that big change, she met a lot of people she didn't know from college, and that became her new support system because they all had different thoughts and perspectives on life. And she just said it was a very good time in her life and shaped her into the person she is now.
Big change.
Big change.
A lot of big, like, I think we can all think of those like landmark, what's benchmark, like sort of traditional times of high school's over, something's gonna happen. You're making a big choice. You're moving from one thing to the next. And kind of thinking about that. And we can relate it back to sometimes life doesn't change that dramatically. Like, you know, when we were talking about pivoting as a privilege, right? Amy kind of said that. So some people don't have these big moments where life's gonna change dramatically. You just move to the next building, right? Like, what does that lead to? But those are big, like not only a big transition, but a space and moving and all that good stuff. Did you guys talk about some of the stuff that made that big change easier or motivated? Like, seems like you need.
Not really.
You did it. You were motivated yourself, self-motivation to make that happen. Very interesting to think about those changes and what they lead to. Where would you be? Who would you be? Okay, all right. Anyone, who else has something they wanna? Go ahead.
You're talking about common themes, and I just noticed, both, when they were both talking, you know, Chelsea about having her baby and then Michelle about getting married, like, how both of those things kind of change, obviously, your perspective of life, and in both ways, you become a more selfless person, and you begin to live outside of yourself, obviously, because, you know, you're so used to being on your own in a way and doing what you do and things like that. And then, you know, one day you get married and you have a partner that you have to think about and consider in all decisions. And then same thing with having a child, like they become your life, and, you know, in both ways you expand as a person and your ability to love and care for other people, and put others before yourself.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thinking about that, those changes and how it, with each event or whatever you do, you learn something about yourself, maybe how you were living, whether you're made good changes or bad, you know, changes for the better is kind of what we'd probably all highlight in our conversation. We get to choose this conversation, right? So how it changed us for the better, how it changed our perspective. I think you shared that for Catherine too. Like her life was very structured, she had more freedom versus you guys less free. Like in some ways it's less freedom maybe having a child or husband. But all of those things helped you change your perspective and what was important, your priorities, and how you changed that. Those are all pretty powerful. things that change. Anybody else got something they want to share?
I think the two young ladies I spoke to here was mostly more just about, I think, change, right? Like big significant changes that put, just strife on their personal lives to professional lives, from changing from a profession, making a significant jump to moving across the country, and especially during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic that we went through as well, from working remote to now being back in person. So I think that there was just a lot of significant change, or just not for everybody, right? I mean, and dealing with that emotionally and how that stress, how you handle that stress.
Some of that's the difference, I think, between when change is imposed upon you and when you choose it. So your all's examples are, I choose, I'm gonna move from California to West Virginia, this is exciting, versus I'm not allowed to leave my house, job tells me this, or my job has told me I have to do that now. So the difference between when you feel more control, when you feel like you're a part of that decision versus, I think some of those, at least COVID, none of us really chose. We had no control, and that felt pretty, I think we can all relate and remember how unsettling and not good that felt, to just be told and things changing all the time on you. So yeah, very true. Anything? Yeah.
Both people I spoke with feel like determination was a part of their stick to the change. The decision, like you said, was a choice to change. So they had that privilege, but also the determination to stick with it is something that came from the inside, I think. Because he took over a role someone had for 25 years, so you can imagine a lot of criticism, people judging you for not doing the same way the person did, or even, other issues. And then Lisa being able to notice that she missed where she left professionally, but still saying, be determined to stick for it with what I chose to do for a year with my change.
Yeah, I think those are good. Change isn't always easy and it's not instant, which we are a world that really likes that instant. Oh, this was the right decision and it pays off on day 2, 3 at the most, right? But to have to wait how many months or how much, like how long do you know? But to be determined to see it through and at least give it a fair chance to see what that change, where it really lands, and what it was gonna do for you. Your perspective of your first week of college was probably not what it is now, right? Like whatever you thought you were gonna get out of it isn't what you did. So it's always good to kind of remember that. So thank you all very much for those. And just to say, we're talking about change and some of the things that, in our professional world, some of the ways we changed at Starfire, some of the things we went through, and just to kind of remind us all that we've all done some changing. We've all done it, and we had some things that made it easier, made it harder, and just to kind of keep that in mind as we start to think of those things.
Ready to share?
Yeah.
There's a great book called Being Wrong. A whole book about being wrong. And the opening thing is, it's funny about the world and how we think is, we're wrong all the time. We go a certain way and we get in traffic, and we go another way we don't. Or we decide we want to be this major and we have to shift it to this. Or we tried this person out and they weren't so hot for us. And we make wrong decisions all the time. And yet, if everybody sat here and said, hey, look back on your life, everybody says this, well, everything happened for a reason. How does that make any sense? We're always wrong, and yet everything happened for a reason. So I don't have an answer. I didn't finish the book. So it's going to be you that has to figure out what exactly it is about that. Change. So let's just review. We talked about this pattern. Y'all have seen it. Pam shares it, which is wonderful. Thank you, Pam. Please keep helping people see this. We gotta say, tattoo this on the back of your eyelids. You see it everywhere, right? And we kind of talked about it. We said things like, this is all of our service system. This is the way that, we're kind of lined up. We said it's got something to do with money, right? CMS tells us how we are allowed to bill for things. So this pattern really creates this sense of isolation, especially social isolation for people, human beings with disabilities. Is this working? Try it again. Unplug that, would you, Kristen? Yeah, that one there. Let's see if that, my clicker is being weird. Otherwise, we're gonna have to go back to our nod system. Well, let's do it. Me and you.
Alrighty, I'm ready.
All right, move us along.
Well, I'm gonna take this out though.
Okay.
My clicker's not working.
Angry one, the clicker.
It wasn't.
Just, yeah,
Want one more?
hit the arrow, yeah. Go ahead. Here we go. So this left us with uncomfortable questions. And these are just a few of them, right? One is, would I want the life in that pattern? And has anything changed in 30 years? And we talked about that too. And everybody's like, it's kind of better, but there's still some major parts of that pattern that are still alive. Has anybody come up with a solution yet or a rebuttal? I can't wait till that happens. Did our work perpetuate loneliness? Were we actually creating some of the problems that people are experiencing on a social isolation level? And what's our responsibility? If this huge problem is happening, what are we to do about it? One of the things that we have to commit ourselves to is studying the problem. Keep studying it. So we ask the question, why is this happening? And we have three kind of things that we think that are a big part of that recipe. Next question. The first is, of course, go ahead. We are stuck in a rut. Talk about that. We are inheriting mindsets and practices and policies and procedures and rules that have lived with us throughout history. And so we're just kind of stuck in what people are handed to us. Not only that, but this is how we earn a living, right? So we talked about at Starfire, our Medicaid billing rates were $7 a person per hour. And that's illegal for me to pay a staff $7 a person per hour, right? So I had to put at least 2 people with disabilities together so I could get to 14. And then I could pay a staff 10 or 12, right? But I still wasn't making much. And then we figured out that if we were in groups of 5, that was pretty sustainable for us. But we were in rooms in shelter workshops in Cincinnati where there were 20 human beings with disabilities, 1 staff getting paid $12 an hour, right? So let's do the math real quick again. I know, I love math. It just tells us so much. When $7 per hour times 20 people is $140 an hour minus $12 an hour that you're paying out is, this word gets weird, 128. So some of these places are making $128 an hour. That's a hell of an incentive to keep that model going, right? So essentially the more people with disabilities that I can shove into my building at Starfire, the more money I can make, the more money I can pay my staff. And everybody saw that as a cool thing. So we have this legacy of these business models that create a financial pressure. Somebody said before, like, how do you shift something that you depend on? How do you change something that is your livelihood? And not just yours, but a lot of people's, right? So that's in our system. So we're stuck in a rut, and this pays the bills. All right. And then this was breaking our hearts last time. It's not just that, but we're swimming in the water. We're swimming in the water of our culture. And that culture has a certain way of seeing human beings with disabilities. And it does break our hearts. So let's go through and see how culture sees us real quick. Before we get into that, let's talk about what we said was, okay, so culture, money, and kind of like history. Those are the things we're kind of trapped in. And what we're trying to get to is a good life for people, right? Next, Kristen. And one of the ways that our society sets up good lives is for us to have social roles. Essentially, how do we stack up with each other? So I'm a doctor is a really valued social role, leads to a really good life. I'm homeless would lead to a really devalued social role and a really bad life, right? Next. And the way that people get some of these social roles is that they live into society's values. And so society values intelligent, powerful, healthy, wealthy, young, independent, beautiful, strong, productive, fast people like all of us, right? It doesn't necessarily value people that it sees as intellectually capable or living in poverty or dependent on a service system or feeble or useless to the economy. So our big radars should be going up and saying, do we know anybody like that? Do we know anybody that's perceived as unhireable, unmarriable, unknowable, unfriendable, right? And that's where we start to say, whoops, we got a problem. And we think it's kind of a marketing problem, that we're telling a story, the society's telling a story about disability. I think everybody in this room would disagree with that story, right? So we got to tell a new story. So the way these things interplay with each other is really important. If you have a good life and you have strong social roles and you live into society's values, you get more of all that. If you have none of the society's values and you have very devalued social roles, your chances of good life are always diminished. So they just kind of interplay with each other. So we put those arrows up to remember that they really influence each other. And we talked about the force of devaluation itself. And this is really hard to admit that we do it, but we do. We copped to it last time. Each one of us devalues another human being in our life or in our world. Just don't like that person. Each one of us might not like a certain group of people for some reason. And those kinds of devaluation are crappy. We're sad about that. We all have work to do on ourselves. But the thing that we're concerned with in this milieu, in this session and in our work, is the devaluation of the rest of society is devaluing collectively people with disabilities. And there's not many people that are like us saying, wait a second, that's a harmful story, it's the wrong story, and there is a better story because we've witnessed it, right? So we're kind of in the minority. This is all of us down here advocating for people that are being kind of devalued. Does that make sense? So that's where we've been. And the forms that the devaluation takes is incredibly complex, ancient. Again, this is part of our history. This is part of our service system. It's part of our culture. We see people with disabilities as dangerous, right? That they're violent and they need to be locked up from other people. Go ahead. We see people as a burden on society. And for each of these, we talked about how this happened over the course of history and how it's still alive today. So people have been seen as a burden. That's how we sell levies. That's how Starfire raised money. Please help these poor parents, right? And it's still alive where we've got Iceland trying to get rid of Down syndrome, right? So this idea of a burden is still going on. Combine that with the violent story. Things are starting to get pretty concerning. And maybe it's not that violent, but maybe it's just that we see people as charity cases. Maybe we see them as people that we can get ego points by helping, right? And again, Starfire sold that. Please come volunteer. Please get your service hours. Please use these people to tell the judge that you're a rehabilitated individual, right? Or whatever. But we're constantly kind of using people with disabilities as objects, right? Next. Maybe it's not just getting social points. Maybe it's getting heaven points. So now we see people with disabilities as gifts from God, and that if I treat this person well, God will give me an eternal blessing or whatever. And again, it's kind of related to the idea of a person becoming an object. Next. And it dehumanizes them, takes away their full humanity.
We talked about how people have been seen as a diagnosis. They've been seen as halfway sick or halfway dead. We've been seen as people as the complete identity of Down syndrome swallows up everything else about them. Complete identity of autism swallows up everything else about them. And then that can have some problems because we don't see people as, say, worth saving, right? What is it, Melissa's Law? Where they actually had to pass a law a couple years ago that says that people with disabilities, developmental intellectual disabilities, are allowed to receive transplants. Because before that, they were deemed to not have the quality of life that doctors thought was worth having an organ. Look it up, Melissa's Law, okay? But that is what we're talking about. If somebody is seen as being so, the disability is such a part of their identity that they're not even worth saving or investing in their life. People with disabilities are seen as subhuman, not fully human. I know a guy that lived in Orient and they yanked his teeth out, bit himself because he hated the place. And lived the rest of his life without teeth. But people said, well, he can't really feel pain anyway. Right? That was kind of the story. So people were tied up. Aristotle back in the day said people with disabilities or deformities ought to be thrown in the river, essentially, right? So we've got this history that's with us. Next, people with disabilities are seen as little buddies or somebody to make jokes about, right? Big blockbuster movies with Woody Harrelson and everybody's like just kind of silly props, essentially, right? Next. And people are treated as eternal children. So I showed my picture. This is me as Santa Claus with adults with disabilities, right? And it was not locking people up or injecting them with experimental vaccines. It was just, me assuming that everybody with a disability thought like a kid. So all these roll up into what we just talked about, which is this idea that people are like each other. This is the grandparent of them all to me. If we can assume that everybody with a disability is like each other, then one person needs safety. Now they all are violent, right? One person is medically fragile. Now they're all medically fragile, right? So the like each other is a really dangerous story to me. This is the one. If we could get people to start thinking of people by their name, right? Kyle and Pam and Tim, Kristen. Then we could start to say, well, Kristen's not really violent that I know of, right? But we could change that from somebody like Bridget, who really does have a safety concern. Okay, thank you, Kristen. Next. So anyway, that was heartbreaking, wasn't it? It was hard, it was heavy, but it's important to notice it because if we don't study the problem, we can't do anything about it. Go ahead. So the question is, what do we do about it? And we think it's tell a better story. There's a story that's been told. We use this image of a balance beam because this old story is so strong. It has the power of history. It has the power of billions of dollars of marketing. It has everybody's experiences right here. This is what we know. That's why we started Starfire in the version that it was because we believed in all of this. And the best thing that we had to offer that was this day program and outing model, right? And so what we're trying to do is figure out how can we at least provide a little bit of a counterbalance. And people would say, can't you do both, Tim? And I'd say, well, let's just say that this is the tilt right now. If I do both, I'm not changing this. But if I stop doing this, and if I start doing this, I might get this to go here. And the dream is for this, right? That this part is the big, heavy, awesome, powerful story where people with disabilities have their own lives and amazing connections and all that. So just kind of think about that every day is how can you tilt that, right? And we started this with 3 stories. And we told you about Telly and how he started volunteering in his neighborhood, and we told you about Jenny and how she started volunteering in her neighborhood and hosting yoga festivals and stuff like that. And we told you about Jerry, who started volunteering in his neighborhood. So you've got 3 stories of like where we started selling. So one of the questions we have, and we always get, is how do you get there from where we are? So Starfire is one organization, but really we've been 4 organizations. The first organization was the old story. We were a day program with outings all over the city of Cincinnati, okay? We were knee deep in that pattern. But we actually became 3 new kinds of organizations. And all of them kind of helped us step out of our history and helped us think about money and financial pressures in a different way. And we're going to go through these 3 models for you, just to give you some ideas, right? So if you are a provider that is in a day program or a workshop or a big group setting, we've got something for you in a minute. If you are somebody who's just able to do a few hours a week out in the community with people, you know, like a supported living or independent living or, you know, homemaker personal care, that kind of stuff, we've got that for you too. And if you're somebody that's like, whoa, I'm way outside the box, we've got that for you too. But all of them based on personalized community projects. We're not offering this as a replacement for the service model. Obviously, people still need what's called beds and meds. Obviously, people still need therapies and help in along the ways. What we're offering is there a way to supplement all of that system stuff and requirement with some connection, with some identity, and with some kind of culture building, right? So the first model we call springing people out. Let's look at that one. So this is when we had a big day program and we started to say, holy moly, we've got to change some things. And this model is really terrific if you have a budget and there's no wiggle room for you to innovate. Okay, so if you have a budget and you're like, how the heck are we going to do this? This is what we figured out around it. We're going to go through that in a second. It also helps to add value and opportunity to people's lives. And it's very flexible because you almost have complete control over what somebody does within their day, within your day program. So if that's your story, you're going to love this and it'll be kind of fun. So Bridge, you want to tell them that?
Sure. So I think, go ahead, Chris, does it zoom in?
You just tell Kristen
Yeah.
next.
Yeah, okay, sorry, Chris, I don't have the headline down. All right, so just in this model, so these are people, so even the people that Telly, Jenny, and Jerry were all in our day program as well. And those stories started from there, and we're gonna talk about how we sprung them out, basically giving them time each week just about themselves. What that did for me as a staff, instead of just having the running list of who I need to check in about their needs or make sure went to the bathroom or persons I couldn't talk to because it takes too long for them to type in their words because I have to do this urgent need over here, was dedicated time to each and every person. So those stories the videos that we shared with you a while ago. But this is Sam and her story. So she's in the day program. She's the most agreeable person in the world. So if you were asked what she liked, I could probably tell you she likes anything you like, because she is the people pleaser of all time. So when I'm going out with her or spending this individualized time, if I'm asking her for the ideas or for her for the input, I'm not gonna get very far. I've gotta be looking and thinking about what she knows. What I know that she's shown some interest in of her own choice versus just trying to please whoever the staff person is. But we recognize pretty quickly she's really good with her hands. Likes the crafty side of things, not necessarily like visual art or creating like Pam, like she's more in the craft zone. But talking to her, and part of our time was to look for those things and also go back to her neighborhood, where she was, one of her parents her mom would still complain about the bus ride, right? So she was taking a good half hour, at least in my car would take 20 minutes, much less than public transit like that we have. That would probably have taken whatever is allowed to take, right? So I think it's above an hour and a half. So to drive her back over there and explore, we found a local sewing shop, locally owned. Terry is wearing she's in the little tank top. She owns this local sewing shop. She agreed to teach Sam to sew. So we're showing up for some sewing lessons here and there that they offer already, right? Like this isn't above and beyond, but just plugging her in to somewhat, this place is probably 1.5 miles from her house. So she would go and sew. From there, our project was, we talked to Terry, and we decided to do a project to sew bibs and burp cloths to donate to another Sam really loves. She was about to have a niece, loves babies, whatever. She also would have done, again, tell me what to do and I'll agree to. But anyway, what we landed on is the people that knew her was like, babies seem to be really what you're focused on right now. So we got women, Terry advertised to some of the local sewers. Sam and I had met some other people at libraries that had sewing machines to invite. And some of the people she knew from her personal life, like her aunt made cookies. So we got together on a Friday once a month for a few months to sew together. Terry let us use the space and, also advertise to meet new people. From that, Sam joined a quilt guild. That shop still, not long after started and still does open sewing. So Sam can show up and sew for a couple hours. It's not 9 to 3, but she doesn't need that necessarily for her circumstances at home. But she could go there and just sew on their machines for a couple hours and there's a staff person there to anyone can help. But, so that's sort of Sam's story. Okay.
So we're gonna come back to some math. You guys love this, but this was like, when do you learn fractions? Is that 3rd grade, 5th grade, something like that? Anyway, Sister Felicia taught me fractions. Here's what our day program looked like, 10 to 2. So we have big 15-passenger vans. You can fit 12 people comfortably with some coolers and some whatever else you need to bring with you. And you can go anywhere in the city. So we had these 10 to 2 groups, and that was billable at $35 an hour, right? Or, well, it would have been 35 times 2, $70 an hour minus 2 staff, right? That was our day program billing scheme. What we thought was, man, we gotta get these groups smaller, because we're starting to learn that people with disabilities being in big groups was diminishing their opportunities. So we started with groups of 5. We said, well, 10 to 2, as Sister Felicia taught me, is the same as 5 to 1 plus 5 to 1. Right? Is my math adding up here, Kyle? Is that right on? Okay, thank you. God rest her soul, she'd be proud of me. And we thought that we were really hit something. But you know what we discovered is, even in that small group, people's identities were being lost. So when we walked into that soup kitchen in Telly's neighborhood to volunteer, everybody, if you watch the video, Daniela says, everybody said, "Hi, Starfire." So Telly disappears, he becomes Starfire. We'd all wear Starfire shirts, staff would say Starfire staff, van said Starfire. We were marketing that Telly was Starfire, right? And Telly loses who he is. So we had to go back to the drawing board. What did Sister Felicia say about ratios and fractions that isn't 5 to 1 plus 5 to 1 or 10 to 2? Rich, what was it? We're getting complex here, aren't we? 9 to 1 plus 1 to 1 is also the same billing ratio. We can still bill $70 an hour. Here's a secret. If you're really smart and you got some support coordinators in cahoots with you, you can actually shift this 1 to 1 to be HPC hours if people aren't using too many of theirs and they got some room. So then we started making more money actually. So we could build a day program right here, and then for a couple hours a day, we could bill the HPC rate, which shot us up from $7 an hour to $21 an hour. So now actually getting this 1 to 1 was more lucrative for our organization, which was really helpful. So what we ended up doing was we would take these, go ahead one more, this became our model. So this 1 to 1 group, this 1 to 1 was when we started building Telly's story and Jenny's story and Sam's story, right? And there's some qualities to it that are really important. This time is personalized. This is not just to go to Arby's and have lunch with my staff, right? And we had a huge problem with that at first. Which our staff's credit cards, they were like out of control. And I'm like, you're just eating out with this person. right?
Read now, you better be eating with someone.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay if you have that other person there.
Right. And it had to be dignified. We couldn't be going out and just, doing stuff that wasn't really elevating the person's social status. It had to invest in something. It wasn't just a throwaway time. We started seeing staff who were just throwing away their time. Oh, we went to the park and walked around. We went to the coffee shop, drank some coffee. Well, that's awfully nice, but it doesn't lead to what you're doing next week or next month or next year or in the next 50 years, right? So we really said, you've got to invest the time. It's got to be intentional and it's got to be opportunistic. So if you find out that the president's coming to town and they want to talk to this person, we can flip flop that time and you can go, please go, right? If a Saturday night happens and you want to take Friday afternoon off, fine, take Friday afternoon off, take that person out on Saturday night because that's so critical to their social life. If it was intentional and invested, right? It's also creative. And lastly, just this word captures it all for us. Sorry, I know we're, secular world here, but this was time that we said it's sacred. This is this person's only time when they have somebody who focuses on just them in our entire program. And so you've got to treat it like it's the most holy, sacred, important aspect of their week. And that means it's got to be all that stuff, right? So this is what we did. This isn't more math. It's so brilliant. I came up with this and I have another schedule of like how we had meetings around this. I will not share because it's too complex. Google calendars couldn't even figure it out. But we figured out that if we had 10 people, there were 10 half days in a week, right? There's 5 mornings and 5 afternoons. So this person went out Monday, this person went out Monday afternoon, right? You get it. So we were able to make sure that everybody in our day program at this ratio had 1 half day a week to spend on their own life with a staff that would focus sacred time with them. And that's what built all of these great projects that sprung out of our day program. But we still had a day program. And you know what we discovered about that? At first, we're like, well, let's just, do arts and crafts and Wii bowling and that kind of crap, right? But then we realized we could actually use day program time for something too. So the day program staff would start using the day program time to do the logistics of their projects. They make flyers for the block party, or they would send emails to people that were interested in art, say, can you meet next Thursday morning, right? They would have the day program group would plan for their time out over the next month. We'd help work with people with disabilities who would do Google. Sometimes that got us in a little trouble, but for the most part, it was a solid plan, right? But they would prepare things. They'd get on Facebook and make announcements or say, hey, we're going to host a lesson on cooking. If somebody's interested in cooking, we actually had a kitchen so we can have the cook in to teach the group cooking. And then when that person had their individual time, they might go to the chef's kitchen. Right? But everything that was individualized was out of the building. Everything that could be kind of like, it didn't matter. Nobody was really seeing it as a group, right? Then we could do that in the building as a group. And that became our day program curriculum in a sense, which was really cool because we had a ton of time to plan projects there. So anyway, spring out model. Bridge, we got 4 more examples real quick.
Yes. Yeah.
One more, Kristen.
So just to give you some idea of what else was going on, that black and white picture is a picture of Michelle and a group of citizens who got together for writing. They put journals with writing prompts in coffee shops, and then they would gather together to see what people had written and sort of publish them in their own little group and things.
Like, who was your first kiss?
Like,
Tell us a secret.
could be scandalous prompts that would be in
Kiss
line.
and tell.
Michelle was a big fan fiction of, I think, Harry Potter. Right? So there were some, scandalous things. So they would get together and do this. So it was writing, but sort of as a group, what they would all do and kind of felt energized around. Another one, Candace loved fashion, makeup. And we connected, she was working with the staff and they found a woman who wanted to do makeovers for single moms. And she called it the Warrior, like
Warrior Moms, yeah.
Warrior Mom Project. Like she was working on Warrior Mom. So Candace jumped in and with her time and the staff, like what could they do to support this project and this woman and also meet all these amazing women who cared about fashion and makeup and also caring for other women. So they got to do that and obviously had an awesome photo shoot as part of it because this is not your typical picture. Love and life, go ahead. Another one, Michael loves beer. That would not be a group activity in the day program. So let's just say.
It'd be an MUI in the day program.
That did not happen, but he met some other people, some brewers, actually when Mad Tree was brand new or just starting up, he met those brewers. He got together with another local brewery and they made their own, they created a special brew, like a unique one, and named it and had a tasting event. Since then, after that, both breweries were like, what's next? What do we do? Michael got hired, right, at both brew, like, a day here, a day there, and kept those jobs still going. And as well as guys that called him for, hey, we should go play golf. And some of that, they got to know him well enough to know what he actually, he loves golf and everything else. So he actually added to that social side of things too. And who else? This is Doug. So Doug, as you can see, doesn't really speak, but he uses his Dynavox, his laptop, whatever the latest tech is. He started, that is some people that work at our Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati. And he worked with them to be your tour guide. So he started doing videos and commentary around the exhibits and sharing those. And he worked with those guys around that and different things around, embracing his technology, the fact that he can tour, it's almost like his own GoPro there on his wheelchair. So he worked on that. So that's just another snapshot of some of the ways we were using our time, meeting with some other people and helping, whether or not our staff all dreamed those things up as much as they met people who helped them come up with the next step or what else could be possible or what would we do around beer? What would we do with this guy he's got a video. He likes to, he'll program in comments and talks. So with that help and those support from other people, all these things were kind of born or supported.
So the second model is we were fine with that, right? We were like, okay, this day program gives us a lot of space and energy to do all this. But at some point, we decided to shift into the next version of ourselves, which was we're just done with the day program. It was making plenty of money. It was making a lot of money. They make a lot of money. But we just didn't want to do it anymore. So we phased our day program out and we created just a regular connection model. So we said, let's just keep that HPC time. 3 hours a week max. And we didn't want any more. People were like, oh, we have 5 or we have 7 or whatever. Subway, or we can do more. We're like, no, just 3 hours a week. Because in our mind, investing a little bit every week is better than 8 hours of what essentially became just hanging out to cover other people's stuff, right? So we felt like that would cheapen the time. So we really limited ourselves to 3 hours a week. So this is something that if you're supporting somebody in a independent living situation or whatever else, you can just fill a couple hours a week on HPC and do the same stuff. So it's really a lot of fun. It blends in with traditional supports like, work and job development and that kind of stuff. So anyway, Bridge, take it away. Here's some stories that came out of that.
So this is Cashel, who you'll see there. Cashel told us once that she kicked herself out of her work job program, like day program. She kicked herself out. So you can imagine what that looked like. But our staff started working with her. And again, the emphasis was on what does Cashel like to do and where does she live? Even better when the staff that we have doesn't live too far from there and shares some interests, right? Like that kind of works out even better. But so Cashel started investing in her neighborhood, and you can go ahead, Chris. And they got to know there was something at the time, a new effort in Cincinnati called the Neighborhood Games. So Cincinnati has 52 neighborhoods, and so somebody wanted to do an Olympics competition from neighborhood to neighborhood. So Cashel and our staff kind of stepped up as the rep of her neighborhood. It was a great way to meet a lot of people all at once. but maybe not as invested in what Cashel, like, she enjoyed it. She enjoyed meeting people. These were not typical like athletic, it was like beer stein, like like not your typical, like this was not all that athletic. Some probably were, some weren't. But they met a ton of people, expanded that. And then they got to, I think after that, they kind of honed in a little more on the neighborhood. So you can go to the next one. And started to really invest and discover a little more as they got to know each other better. Cashel really loves art. And she definitely loves her neighborhood to really take it to a very like down to the bone. So she got to know some other artists and activists. Miss Cynthia on the left, Alicia's on the right. They started working on blighted property and doing just some, like you can see like I want and I wish. So they were just putting out posters. They go to the library, print out the posters with their time to bring to Alicia, and they post them there. They started an artist collective that would meet once a week during that time frame that our staff had already arranged, right? So that magically we can meet here as artists together and what do we want to see in our neighborhood? And they've since, they did varieties of projects, but they've done murals. So that's a mural that the project, this artist collective worked on together. And then is there another one? Yeah, that's the blight parking one. All of them. Oh, yeah. So they actually, Cashel and the Artist Collective were given this award for Lower Price Hill. So Cashel went from being the person who kicked herself out of a day program to being a neighborhood leader and winning an award at this. She, to your point, she still goes, we have an art-focused day program. I think she goes there. But she's still.
We don't have it, it's in
No,
Cincinnati.
in Cincinnati, not us. But right, like, so she does still go to like a day program, right? But she has this on Thursdays and there's some, again, time that the neighbors have supported her mom to make the decision that she should not go on this day because this is the day we do these things, right? So she has these women and these people supporting her in her life, and how many years down the road and what will that mean for her, her mom, for Cashel, so.
Can we stick on this picture? I just want to underline this go back.
Look at
one.
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good job, Chris.
It's okay, you're doing great, Kristen. She was kicked out of a shelter workshop. She is now the visionary of her neighborhood. How many people have been lost? How many of those stories have been lost? Because we can't get our minds out of the model, right? Just really feel it for a second. The loss of history, the loss that people have, and we have got to figure out a way to give birth to these new stories. Thanks, Chris. All that is the one-on-one model of the day program, minus the day program. Go ahead.
Hey, let me ask a question.
Yeah, ask a question, Pam.
Yeah. I have a question. Could you, because it seems so easy, and I know it's not easy. So like for those providers who we know are working, they're really trying to get there and they're trying to take that step out. Can you give a little bit of like highlight on the mess that it is really just kind of finding your way through the muck to these success stories and how that's okay?
Yeah, the biggest mess is people feeling like they're in trouble for what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And kind of sniping at each other. So my biggest problem was I had people that really wanted to do the one-on-one work and people that were really scared to change. And they would get mad at the people who wanted to go out and do the new stuff. And the people that did the new stuff were mad at the people that didn't want to do the new stuff. That was the biggest thing. So that is going to happen, right? There's going to be tension because we are in a crossroads in our field. Our entire field is asking the question, what is the historical role of people with disabilities and is that even sustainable or tenable, right? And what's the new role? There's justice issues that are coming up, so we're just gonna rub up against that. The one thing I would tell people is, here's what's true. People that I thought would be awesome connectors out of my day program were awesome connectors. People that I thought were awesome connectors out of my day program, some of them weren't awesome connectors. People that I thought would be terrible at connecting in my day program were awesome connectors. And people that I thought would be terrible at our day program were terrible connectors. So the truth of the matter is, if you can give everybody a chance and say, why don't you spend a few hours with somebody that you align with? That might be the way forward, is to just say, and honestly, do it yourself. I connected for people, I was telling you the story, but I connected for people myself as a leader of the organization, just to figure out, what does it feel like to spend 3 hours with someone? That's how we discovered it, was Allie went out with somebody for 6 hours. And she did that for a month, and she comes back, I was like, Allie, how's it going with Josh? She says, it's awful. We want to kill each other by noon. We were like, oh, you don't ever spend 6 hours with somebody. It's just 3. So that's where we started to design it as 3 hours. That was enough time to get to our day program, get prepared, get in the car, go to something for about an hour and a half, and come back to the day program.
And then get that downtime versus like, what do you want to do now? What do you want to do now?
So you talk about the change for the providers, what about for the individuals who are very used to the same thing for years and years and years? So I worked for a day program like 6 years back, and I had an individual where I would do one-on-ones with him, and I would take him, I worked out of Franklin County, in Canal actually, and I would take him up to Fairfield County to a pantry, and he would fold bags. And I never knew what it meant. He's very repetitive, fold bags Thursday, fold bags Thursday, fold bags Thursday. I was like, oh, you love this, that's so exciting, let's go. And I went for the first time, and they were plastic, like Kroger bags, Sam's Club's bags, and he would take the bag and he would fold it like this, next bag.
Yep.
And they would unfold bags and have him refold them, just the same task, sitting at a table, not conversing with anyone. And I was like, this is the most pointless trip I've ever been on.
I think that's where, as staff.
It's creative.
It takes, like, there is a lack of creativity out there, right, for what someone can do or how they show up. If you're in jobs, like, right, like nobody just walks in and fills all the job description. There's a lot of no's, like to your point, like for person, like there's the big picture of like, oh, what do we do with it? Like, but as a person who's out there, who's sending the email, oh, I found your card in a coffee shop. Will you? Could we paint with you? Right? Like those, and there's some hurts that you have to buffer, right? Like I don't tell anyone that what's going on until it's real, right? Like I'm not saying, oh my gosh, I've reached out to 5 artists. Can't wait until I know that we're actually going to go see an artist, right? Showing up to some traditional volunteer roles, and you don't have to stay. I mean, I think that's the freedom and the discussion that we as a staff would have, like, oh, I thought this was going to be cool, but we're in a room all by ourselves. Like, what's the difference? Why are we doing this? Let's keep looking, right? So what is the next thing? Or is there something better out there? Or is this good enough for here? But what can I do with a different time frame then? Like, if you're happy here, maybe that's not where I'm gonna push you. Like,
Right.
let's do something on Wednesday instead of Thursday.
And the thing is, he had done it for like 10, 15, 20 years. And so to us, we see it as something that's like not a valuable task that's gonna get him anywhere. But to him, it's just something that's been ingrained in his head because no one's ever like really tried. And then I would try to offer up other activities, and he was just so dead set on folding those dang bags every Thursday that I was like, I don't know how to, get you to try other things. So that's your one-track mind on folding bags.
I think that's what, like Tim had mentioned earlier, like sometimes we're not making the automatic change of that,
Right.
but adding something new.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
still have the comfort of something that they know to be true, but then also I can be more likely to try something new if this isn't being taken away from me.
Don't mess with Thursday.
Well, that's
what I would do.
Yeah.
I would just say, oh, Thursday's a problem?
Yeah.
That's on Thursday. What's Wednesday? What's Monday? What's Tuesday? What's Friday and a half or whatever? But I would seriously not mess with Thursday because it creates barrier. I would also not mess with that guy necessarily, especially as you're starting off. So if you're in a day program and you're trying to get a quick win, don't go for the person who's going to give you the most crap about it, right? You might want to go for the person that's like, please, God, yes, get me out of here. That'll give you guys energy. That'll give that person a chance out, and you can refocus the energy towards somebody. And maybe they see it and they're like, well, Thursday you did what? That's cool. I want to do that too. But you don't necessarily, right? You can't lead a horse water. You don't necessarily have to invest everything in the most difficult stories, especially if you're just starting out. We're like, quick wins, quick wins, quick wins. There's a lot of people with disabilities trapped in our models that shouldn't be in there. I want to get those people out as quick as possible so I can really circle resources around the people that are really need a lot of support. The other thing is just in your story, like driving so much, like we are hyper local. At some point I told staff, I was like, if you go beyond a mile from a person's front door, I'm not paying your mileage. Like, I'm just kidding, but I kind of mean it.
because that relationship is then not sustainable. What we're looking for is things that that person can butt up against people in the grocery store, in the library, on the street. That person, other people can start to see them more regularly. Maybe even look out for them. If it's raining and they're walking in the rain, hey, I met you at the thing. So we are always like hyper local. And then, I mean, lastly, we'll talk about this in November. We've got a bunch of tools that we're going to go through on how to build these projects out. But one of them is stop living in the imagination of our society. I'm sorry, but the imagination of our society about what people with disabilities can do is like that. Bridget's right. You call up people and you say, hey, I work with a person with a disability that wants to make a difference in the world. Well, we don't, we could have a service project for her.
Actually, not what I do.
Like they
because
become the.
That's the answer again. So I
Right.
just play it cool.
But they
We're
think
just
they're.
interested in something.
Right, they're the service, you don't even say it anymore, right? Like, they're the service recipient in the society's mind, right? So sometimes we just have to invent our own world. You saw that, like, nobody asked Sam to do burps and, or claws and bibs and booties. You guys just did it. You have to find the space where there's freedom. There's no no's. There's only yeses, because you're inventing it. So we're like, invent the new box. Because the box around disability is so tight and closed off. And that's not our fault. That's the culture, that's society.
After you get a few easy wins, how do you address the situation with folks who maybe might be a little bit more of a challenge? Because I think you maybe have to teeter that line of advocating, but also possibly feeling like you're forcing an activity on somebody who doesn't really want to do it, and then you start getting to that person-centered, like, if they don't want it, what am I really doing here? That's the only question that, like, that I have is because, you know, you get a lot of easy wins, you get a lot of folks who are going out in the community who are doing a lot of really great things, and you're hoping that that is going to create some excitement, some buzz, you know, in your day program and in your setting, wherever you're at, and it just doesn't latch on to some other people. So how do you kind of?
I think what I would say is, so one, hopefully there is someone on staff that has a good enough rapport and relationship that they do know how and to help. What are the baby steps, right? So nobody's project was the next month. It's not as if Sam jumped right to burp class on a Friday. I didn't ask that of the woman, right? Like we started with just, hey, we'd love to learn to sew. Well, and she actually started us with, I like to do this wool felting. I think that might be more your old speed. And we're like, well, okay, I don't know anything about this. So I think it's the baby steps, and it's not a promise of what will happen. It's just see. And I think part of the reality is when you're talking to a group of people and you're trying to get to know them and what would motivate them, you're starting from scratch. Like depending on what your day programming, I mean, right? Like this room full of people, how do I actually know what motivates you and how do I know what you'd actually like to do? And I think that's the question. And I think having that individualized time, which maybe it does start with a lunch out because that's motivating for most of us. We're gonna stop for food, great. But it can't become the habit every week, right? Like that's not where we're stopping. That's not the only thing we're gonna do. But there are some things you can start as easy, right? Like I'm not asking much of you. You're not gonna meet somebody new today. We're just gonna leave the building. That's step one. And that's a win, right? Like we should celebrate that for some people. And then while you're out, like what did you notice? What is possible? What did you enjoy beyond just eating? You know, and like what is the next step? And I think that's where the promise one of, oh, we're gonna meet all these people, like that's not really, that's pretty terrifying. You know, like the community, like some of this, if you bring up the whole thing versus just one step at a time for people, I think that's where you have to start and see where you get.
No, because I think, you know, when you're working with an adult who's, you know, 40, 50 years old, and you're saying, hey, what do you want to do? And they're like, well, I don't know what I want to do, because for 40 years, they've not had a chance to really do anything, experience life per se. So I think what we're trying to accomplish there is by saying, let's just get out, let's go do something that maybe I might have some interest in, and seeing if maybe that sparks an interest, or maybe while you're out, there's something else that you've observed that they might like to say, okay, hey, listen, I see that you had an interest in this, and maybe let's try to build upon that, right? And then, you know, even if that means it's in small groups, one-on-ones, it's in bigger groups, at least you're getting out and trying to accomplish something.
100%, yeah, it's just.
Yes. And there's two things that are critical here. I say this to everybody, and it's the biggest trap we fall into. Number one, which is, again, another thing, you're gonna need a lot of tattoos, okay? I need this tattoo on your forearm. No plural language. Anytime you speak about them or they, you've got to check yourself. And this is a discipline, I still do it all the time. But you've got to say, what is the name of the person that I'm having concerns, questions, or struggles with? Because Josh's struggles are different than Tim's. And so that is so critical that every time you say, how do I get Josh out of how do I get Tim out of the building? That is so different from each other that if we get into they, it accidentally bleeds into a lot of other people, right? So I'm just telling you, what the thing I noticed was the tricks my mind plays on me. And plural pronouns are a huge problem for me in our field. And it was a huge problem for me to get out here. The second thing is hypotheticals. You have to get specific, exact details, right? What is the name of the person you're talking about? What exactly is it that they don't like? What is it that a staff might, who is the staff that might connect to them personally, right? Hypotheticals, what if they don't like it? Get me into fantasy and fear. And all of a sudden, I would start to say, well, if this person leaves my building and they attack somebody because they're mad about having to leave the building, oh no, now nobody can leave the building, right? But how might that person be safe when they leave the building? What would it take? It might take 4 years. Some of these stories took 4 years. Some of them took 8. One of the stories that we've told you about, every staff said, impossible. That person can't leave the building without soiling themselves. 3 staff told us, impossible, will never be included, always has to be here. You've heard the story, you've seen this person. I'm not telling you who it is, but that person had 2 jobs because one person believed in that person. One person said, we can do it. And they asked, how do we help that person? So eliminate the plural pronouns as much as possible. And I promise you, you're going to keep coming back to it. It's just the way we're trained. It's the way our brains are trained. And eliminate the hypotheticals. Because essentially, you're not getting into the reality of the specific. And we had to be in the reality of the specific. That's why I said it's personalized. That's number one. Everything is personalized. Even the problem is personalized. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. This is probably the toughest thing you'll face, I think, is our own thinking and how to get into this. That's the toughest thing. So thanks for bringing up the messy questions, Pam. Appreciate that.
You guys asked some great questions.
They are good questions, though, and they are real. Okay, let's move on. So the catalyzing connections model was awesome. It was just our one-on-one stuff. And here's some examples real quick, if you could, Kristen.
We got Joe, who started doing historical reenactments, still going on to this day, and one of it was focused on the founders of Cincinnati, basically. And this is the woman in sort of the pink dress with glasses to the right, is the descendant of those families who have informally adopted Joe as one of their family because he brought back this cemetery and couldn't believe how blessed they were that he would bring attention to her family. Who's next? We've got Burke, who in his neighborhood, they started a neighborhood bike ride with his neighbors called Pedalpalooza. Went on, I don't know that it came back after COVID, but still Halloween cookouts, just a part of the neighborhood. Everybody knows him in a positive way, not just like, who is that guy? Go ahead. And Craig, who created Science-cincinnati for all those science nerds out there, a time to get together and do science stuff as adults, like basically like a science fair for adults, I think is probably the easiest way to describe it. So those were awesome projects.
All things that were just done out of that one-on-one model. So of course we had this question, why are we starting so late? We're starting when people are 25, they're already trapped in mine or other people's day programs. We are pulling them out of the system, out of the mindset, out of the pattern. Is there any way we can stop getting stuck in there in the first place? So we said, every year, our staff leave us. We hire somebody, we train them, they stay for 2 years, awesome, see you later, bless you, thank you for your good work. They take our values, they take our knowledge, and they leave. So we said, what if we gave one staff salary to 10 families of children with disabilities. And we taught them the same thing we teach our staff. And we gave them the same power that we give our staff. So we said, hey, families, would you like a couple $1,000? And would you like to get paid to do it? And would you like a mentor that teaches you what to look out for about the pattern, how to stay out of it, what assumptions and stereotypes are up against you and your child, and all the stuff we've talked about today, how to launch projects, right? And they said, yes. So it ended up being one of the most transformative things. So if you're way outside the box, you're like, I don't have a day program, I don't have a service model, but I really like to make a difference. You're essentially microfunding awesome families to do cool stuff in their neighborhood. And that's what we do a lot of today. So it's owned by the community and the family. It's driven by the community and the family. Our staff are not even existent. All we do is like tell them yes and no and give them receipts and stuff. And then we give them like mentorship and support. It helps scale the values and learning. So there's one aspect of scale. How do we get everybody kind of franchised like McDonald's or something? Another aspect of scale is how do we scale over a person's lifetime? We think helping families understand all of what we've been talking about will scale so that a person over their lifetime will get the benefit of a family saying, hey, wait a minute, I once learned something else, right? And Rachel gave us some powerful testimony in June. That was important. And that'll stick with you for the rest of your life. And that will influence Cooper's life for the rest of his life. And every time somebody comes to you and says, I think we should do a charity project for Cooper, Rachel's gonna say.
Oh my. I won't throw a punch anyway. I just do it in my head.
And critically, I want to make a distinction. There's a thing called service innovation. That's what we're talking about. We innovated our service, okay? And everybody's like, service innovation. But what we are looking for now is a social innovation. We're looking for changing how we relate and talk to and connect with human beings with disabilities. So that's a social innovation. That's not necessarily a service innovation. But we're using our service innovation in service of a social innovation, which is pretty cool. Kristen, let's buzz through on that.
Yeah. Do you want to do it?
Yeah. So this is Carol. You know her. Some of you do. Mm-hmm. She's wonderful. She's a colleague of ours, and she now leads the family network. She and her family started sewing with neighbors. This is Grayson, her son, who is a really wonderful part of our world. And Grayson can't sew. He couldn't move his arms. But Carol says he loves music and he loves people. So we designed a project that she and her daughters, Bea and Charlie, wanted to sew. And they said, we know Sandy, who knows how to sew. She can teach us and our entire neighborhood how to sew. Thanks. And that launched them into this world where basically Carol and her family are the unofficial leaders of Hamilton, Ohio. They've held pumpkin painting parties and Dia de los Muertos parties. And essentially this is it. They get a couple $1,000, they get support from mentors, and they get to be independent from the system. We talk about equity. They get $500 from us to do their project. They get to tell their own story, share their own pictures in the way that they say. Some families have said, we don't want our child's pictures shared. We'll share our story in a podcast, but we won't talk about our daughter's name. We don't want her used as a billboard. We were like, okay, that's fine. And it actually is fine. And that's important that we honor that. And we trust them to do what they think is right and what works best for their neighborhood and their family. And now Bridget's kind of doing the same thing where she's giving neighbors the same money and the same power, and she's mentoring neighbors. How do you create something cool with your neighbor with a disability in this community? So this is another example of how you take community projects and you innovate. Yeah.
Not to think on the darker side of things, but how do you know that you can trust some of these people?
Who's your best friend?
My husband.
Okay. And how do you know that when you go home tonight, he's not going to axe murder you?
Oh, I don't. I watch too many crime things. I think of it all the time.
But you've known him long enough,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we're after. We're after trust. We are after the connection that happens when people have known each other for a long time. And it's not like Carol or any of the parents are taking Grayson and just wheeling him out there to the park and saying, see you later. She's part of it. So the whole family is involved, right? So there's we say People are safest in the presence of many capable glances. Here's some data. In our day program, we had 300 MUI to UI reports per year. So that's one report for every 400 service hours. Okay. In our one-on-one connecting model, we have 0. We do have a few. It's like one report for every 4,600 service hours. People are 10 times more likely to experience trouble in our day program. Why? People think each other are boyfriends or girlfriends and they're not. MUI. Somebody's distracted because somebody's getting out of the van and the other person's tripping over the curbs, right? Somebody gets lost downtown because I got 6 other people I got to watch for, right? So our day program was actually creating more trouble for people with disabilities than a one-on-one model. So we actually think that people are safest when they're in the presence of those capable, loving glances. And the only way to get those things, long stories, thick stories, caring and safe stories, is to start very young and then to grow that connection and continue to be aware of growing those kinds of connections. That's the whole point of this. Who's going to look after my child when I'm gone? It's not other people with Down syndrome. It's not my staff that keep leaving. It's Sandy. And it's these children, right? Could we go to the next, and I'll show you some more family pictures real quick. Go up one more. Here's Nithya celebrating Hip Hop Day. And she hung little signs around her community. Her son goes to a dance class now with her. Here's Kyle with his family on a bird walk to study the birds and migration patterns of Cincinnati. Who's going to look after Kyle if something happens to Tammy and Scott? We've got the Audubon Society, but that story didn't start until 2017. So it's a 6-year-old story, which is awesome. Kyle's still connected, right? But it's only 6 years old. But we still now, there's some people we can trust here, right? Next. Troy and his family started the pop-up dog party. And they just every month have a little dog party in Clifton, which is a neighborhood of Cincinnati. Next. Ashley and Jeff planted Christmas trees on their farm in rural Ohio. And I wish I could share, again, this is a 6-year-old story now, but I wish I could share pictures of their daughter. She just sent one over the weekend at a neighborhood party of their daughter with 3 other girls at the neighborhood kind of block party hanging out. But these are the stories that we have to start so much earlier. It doesn't mean that any of these people won't need supports or therapies or help. It just means that we've got some people outside of that pattern, right, that are in the citizen realm. That's what we're looking for. We're adding to it. This is the bicycle party that Arnessa and her son planned. He loves bikes. And so Major Taylor was the first Black world champion cyclist. And so they had the Major Taylor kind of like celebration day, and they rehabbed a bunch of bikes, and every kid that went through the obstacle course got a free bicycle, right? So that's how they used the money. Thanks. So this is kind of what we're looking for out of our projects is identity, connection, and culture. Those are our 3 outcomes. So with identity, we're asking, can we get identity beyond disability? And we typically mean it just for the person with a disability. How does Kelly grow beyond his identity around disability? How does Kyle grow beyond? How does Jenny grow beyond? But we actually think that the term disability-oriented identity is helpful because it asks all of us to get ourselves out of our disability-oriented identity. If my identity is that I am focused on autism and that precludes me from knowing this person as a fellow bird watcher, I've got to get beyond that. So we've got to figure out how to get people's perspective beyond disability-oriented. We've got to explore and look for clues. To your point, Josh, we're looking for what lights a person up, even if it's small. What can I invest in? And even if I keep saying, wow, you really love the Buckeyes. That's awesome. Let's talk more about the Buckeyes every single week, even though I'm not a Buckeyes fan, or if I am, or whatever, right? We're constantly looking for clues, constantly looking for ways to connect. We're looking for connection. And we're looking for as many as possible. Could you hit next? We're trying to fill this up. This is what I was talking about. This is so empty. This is so empty. And we can spend our time and our money filling it up. And here's the deal. We're not really responsible for this side, the friends side. But what we can do is fill up the other citizens side and to do it safely, right? So Bridget never dropped off a person with a disability in the hands of another citizen and said, peace out. We have projects that start to see who's leaning in, who's interested, who lights up around this person. Maybe it's not even somebody on our staff. It might be a neighbor. It might be a pastor. It might be somebody from around the block that they went to school with. But we're looking for how can we fill this up? Because then we raise the probabilities that one of these people might come over here. Because we're not really looking for a life full necessarily. I mean, I'd love it if everybody had 50 friends. But how many friends do you really have that you would say, these are my people? They're in my corner. And the number's like 5 to 10, right? So we've got to start filling this up with hundreds of people so we can get these 5 to 10. Does that make sense? So that's what we're looking for with connections. And lastly, we're looking at healing culture. The biggest lesson that we learned in our entire, I said it last time, I'll say it again. It's not disability, it's a problem. It's a culture that makes their life and their family's life tough. That is the problem. We are healing culture. So if we're healing culture, we decided that we had to think about the person with a disability not as the object of our work, but our colleague. So they're working on the culture with us, and so are their families, and so are their neighbors, which is awesome, but it shifts our work. Now we're not trying to figure out how do we fix this person. We're trying to figure out how does this person help us fix all this. Go ahead.
So talking about culture and kind of what Tim's saying, like our culture's pretty broken. I think we've seen things, it's not just for people with disabilities, that culture, our society is not working for. And looking at our work in a bigger, broader scope. Go ahead. We'll keep going. So we've got all this that we're up against for people with disabilities, but this is not just the only people that are devalued by our society and how. Go ahead. So what are we going to do to heal the culture and ourselves along the way with our new colleagues, families, and for people with disabilities? And what are we working towards? Go ahead. So one reality that I think you guys are probably familiar with is trauma, right? And ACE scores, which are prevalent. We know they're more like we've got some people with some pretty tragic lives in our services, but it's not only there. We know it's a much wider story in our culture and our world. There's a lot of focus on ACE scores, right, for childhood just because of the development and that impact, but there's traumatizing adult experiences. There's a list out there too and a checklist. One of the items on that checklist is giving birth to a child with a disability. So I remember as we started getting introduced to trauma and seeing that list and being like, oh, no, how dare, right? Like, oh, that's terrible. Just no, they should delete that. But that would be, again, denying what we know to be true. We have to know what the problem is. The fact that a birth is not celebrated, but it is mourned, or you get letters, right? So people who have had a child can tell you the services start quickly, right? Depending on the diagnosis or when, and what that's like for parents and what it's like for that child from the beginning and what that does to them. So the biggest thing about all trauma, more and more, the more we learn, is the idea of shame. So when something bad happens, the fact that we blame ourselves and it's my fault, and that shame is an isolating experience. Our brain interprets it as isolation. And it's a wicked cycle of I'm not worthy, it was my fault, so therefore I'm not worthy of connection, right? So we've got some things to work against.
Which some of these questions are questions like if people are self-isolating, what have they been through and how do we help them heal?
So, and then we see that. So inward and outward violence, ways that people do things to cope with all of this in their lifetime of feelings of shame or whatever they are. Go ahead. So what do we do about it? So rather than dwelling on all the things that have happened to people, because they're out there, they're with our neighbors, they're everywhere, we really want to think about how do we heal those and lean into the resiliency factors. And so we've kind of just taken them, and these are sort of our versions and quick, like, these are pretty simple. But first and foremost, being together, being with someone else and how that helps you. That is number one. Orienting towards gifts, not just the person with a disability, but everybody. In those projects that you've seen, everybody brought a different gift to the table. It wasn't just the person. My role is really figuring out what gift they're going to bring in, the role they're going to play, but also to appreciate everyone else and what they do in each of those projects. Rhythms of time and space. So how can it be on a regular thing? So if we're planning the bike event, there are committee meetings along the way. It's not just one thing, right? We've got times to get together and see each other and get to know each other and talk more, that invest. Sam, sewing on a monthly basis with the same group of women. What does that do for her and those other women? Everybody's feeling good about themselves and their projects, and high fives all around. And sensory rich memories. So I feel like we talked about this somewhere, it just came up somewhere, like, oh, you were saying, Kristen, you were saying like, oh, I just love to be outside and I hear the crickets, right? Like you said that before I was like, someone just talking about this, and I was like, oh, yeah. So how many times when you're out, right? So one of the people we know loves art. The difference between drawing alone in a room like this versus drawing outside with other people. There are groups that do that, right? So just to think, like somebody might like something, but if you're doing it alone, in a room by yourself versus if you can take that out and have the experience together with someone else, that's what we're looking for. And that's going to help everyone involved. Everyone is healing from that and making great things, like moving forward and beyond that. So
Trauma-informed care is cool, but we got nervous about it because it was being used as a gossip session. And then people who were temporary in people's lives knew really sacred secrets that were then sometimes used even against people with disabilities. So we said to ourselves, well, it's not really our role, but we could lean into these positive things. We could assume that everybody we meet is traumatized. We assume that all of you are traumatized too. So our goal is to figure out, how does everybody experience these four things within the constructs of our program? How does everybody be together with other people, see their gifts celebrated? How does everybody invest in the rhythm of time and space so that they have ongoing things to look forward to? And how does everybody get a chance to develop really intense sensory rich memories? And how does everybody feel affirmed instead of shamed? Because the opposite of shame is affirmation. You're not the problem. You didn't bring this on yourself. This is happening to you. You're wonderful. Thank God you're here. We are grateful for your life. You've got a role to play. So how do we heal? Kristen? Go ahead. We sew together. We have yoga festivals. We drink beer at neighborhood parties. That's how we heal ourselves and our culture at the same time. So every time we do that, the culture gets better around each individual person. This isn't a big, broad, change the world scheme. This is, how do we build a Jerry's culture? How do we build a Telly culture? How do we build a healthy and vibrant Jenny culture? Next. How do we build a culture around Sam? Next. How do we build a culture around Cashel and her neighborhood? How do we build a culture around Carol and her family? Keep going. How do we build a culture for writers and for fashionistas? How do we build a culture around beer and better culture around Michael and Doug? How do we heal the culture around Joe and Robbie and Burke? Next. How do we heal the culture around Craig? How do we heal the culture around Nithya and Vineet and Kyle and his family? How do we heal the culture in Clifton around dogs and Troy? How do we heal the culture around Ashley and Jeff and their family? How do we heal a culture around Arnessa and her family in Avondale? So all of this asks us to change. Right? We can't keep doing the same old thing. We're not there yet. There's something higher purpose that we can offer. So we're going to introduce this little just kind of way to think about that. So Theory U is a change theory by Otto Scharmer. He's this German dude. You can look up his YouTubes. His accent's
pretty awesome. And he says, look, we're facing big problems in our world. He said, every single day, we have people that are hurting themselves, hurting other people, and hurting the environment. And he said, but here's the deal. None of us that I know of wake up and look in the mirror and say, today I'm gonna hurt myself, hurt other people, and hurt my environment. Do any of you do that? So Otto says, he points right at the camera when he says this, you must change your life and your work. Right? So in our world, none of us are waking up every day and say, today I'm going to keep on helping people with disabilities be lonely. Today I'm going to keep on perpetuating the community ideas that people with disabilities are unknowable. Today I'm going to. None of us do that either, right? If you do, please stop. But what we're getting is collective results that no one wants. So we got to stop. And he says, here's how you do it. The U is really interesting. Up here at the top of the U, this is where we are now. And over here, this is where we want to be. And he says, look, this is going to happen whether you like it or not. The big question is, do you want to be a part of it? And if you do, there's two things you got to do. You got to let go of the old story and you got to give birth to the new story. And he says this letting go is kind of like hospice work. You've got to let the old story die. There is a reason why Starfire's Day program was there. It was a good thing, but it was in the way of what we could be doing. It was in the way of the baby being born. So we had to be hospice workers. We had to be gentle and dignified and respectful in letting it go. And we had to be midwives because that baby was very, very, very vulnerable to everybody saying, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. That's not the way this works. Nobody can do this, right? So you've got to be a midwife and say, no, I'm going to protect this baby. Nobody touch it, right? And you have to notice your own thoughts along the way because what happens is all of us are kind of like downloading the old story and we're staying stuck up here. We never actually let go of anything and bring anything forth because we're just constantly just up here every day, rebooting the computer. Next, Kristen. So we're going to give you a couple things real quick. This is what we had to let go of. We had to let go of caretaking. We had to step into connecting. So we're not the end point. The community is. How do you get there? It's not easy, to Pam's point. It's messy. But slowly over time, this might take decades. How do you let go of the caretaking model and step into the connecting model? How do you see the community as the caretakers? How do you have faith in people to be the caretakers versus the faith of the systems, which is maybe it's some caretaking, but can the systems also lead you to people? There are good people in the world. We have evidence right here in this room and on the Zoom call. I don't know who's on the Zoom call. Next. We had to let go of the idea that our building was the place and that the neighborhood was the place of belonging. This is a really powerful question. Our board president's like, you know what we should call this? We should call it an inclusion center. And I was like, whoa, no, we cannot call it an inclusion center because inclusion doesn't have an address, right? Where does inclusion live? At the seamstress shop, at the yoga studio, at the hockey party, whatever the address of that was, right? That's where inclusion lives. So we have to figure out how do we invest in a place that we don't own, manage, and pay for the HVAC bill, which is a significant savings, by the way, because it's not sustainable for the person or for us. We had to let go of fixing people and step into healing culture, as Bridget just said. This is our new kind of like professional development stuff. We were like studying bloodborne pathogens and MUI reports, and we still do individual rights, all that stuff you still got to do. You're 8 hours, right? But we also had to study mindfulness. Can I notice my own feelings? Can I notice when I have doubts or fears? Can I name them and then move past them? can I start to asset map the neighborhood? How do I design think so that if somebody has a lot of trouble, I can say, but how might we get this person to know one more person? We did restorative arts. We did how to have difficult conversations. We all had to go talk with a neighbor with whom we disagreed with about something. That was scary. But that's what you're doing. You're constantly in the space of figuring out how do you have empathy for somebody and affirming their viewpoint while still maintaining your conviction and your knowledge that there's a way to do something you think is good too. We studied improv. That was fun. We read this book that we've been passing around every year. We had to let go of people as clients and started to think of them as citizens. They're not ours. They're not my guys. They are theirs. And they belong to their neighbors and to their family, to their beloveds, right? And that means that they're the community builder with us. We had to let go of the idea that our work was just 9 to 5. Sometimes we weren't allowed. There are some places that have unions and you're not allowed to do some of the stuff that we do. Well, take it home. Are you living an inclusive life in your neighborhood? Is there a family who has a child with a disability on your block that could come to the next birthday party? That's what we started to do in our own community, was build out stories of we could be the people that build the culture of Bellevue, Kentucky, so that every child with a disability has some place to belong to and knows people. And there were times when the system couldn't help. People were being prostituted. People were getting in jail. And we had to find citizens that were outside of the system so that those citizens could help those people with disabilities. We had to get down from our ideas that we were in charge of the outcomes. We will tell you where to go and when to do it. And our program, we are going to program you, right? It's this down kind of like, instead we said, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your time? You want to do a historical reenactment? Cool, let's do it. But how do you orient your time if you know historical reenactments is the goal versus being in my day program is the goal? So we had to let go of that. Next. We had to let go of the idea that people are consumers, always being given, always taking, always being, fed services, and sometimes literally being fed, but then also, well, they are creators. They have something to offer and generate in the world. Next. And we had to step away from accepting the delegation that you are in charge of the lives of people with disabilities and start to say, well, what if it's not just us? How do we actually invite in the community? And what if we didn't take on 40 hours a week? Thanks, Kristen. And instead started to think about, well, how do we step into outcomes that last 40 years from now when we're not there anymore? Right? Because all of us are going to be off the payroll. Kyle knows it all too well. People leave, don't they, Kyle?
Yes, they do.
They do. And so when we're not here, who's going to be here? I told you it was coming, Rachel. I'm sorry. You knew it. Imagine the future. Who's going to be there when I'm not? So here's the deal. In order to move and let go, you're going to face 3 monsters. The first is judgment, okay? And it's like, how dare you even try this? I mean, they can't do that. They don't want to. Or their parents won't let me. Or nobody in the community wants to know this person. They told me no. Obviously, this doesn't work. That's judgment. You're going to have that in the back of your head all the time when you try to let go of old stories. The way to handle this is to say, hello, judgment, my old friend. Please have a seat and be quiet for at least an hour. I'll talk to you again in a little bit because the judgment will pop back up. You guys have those thoughts too? Yeah. We can't do this. They can't do this. You shouldn't do this. Judgment. Just ask it to sit down. It's just a thought. Because next you got to face cynicism. Well, I can't help everybody. If I just help this one person, well, that's cool. But I mean, there's still 10,000 other people in Hamilton County, Ohio with a disability. I guess I shouldn't even try. Or, well, I got 3 hours a week out of our day program for this person because Bridget's so brilliant. but there's still 37 hours to cover. I guess we shouldn't try. That's cynicism. So you say to yourself, hello, cynicism. Let me introduce you to my friend judgment, because I need you to be quiet. Because I need to move past you. I need to let go. And the last one's fear, the voice of fear. Well, if I do anything, I'm probably going to get sued, and then I'll get fired, and we're going to end up eating squirrel sandwiches as a family, and I don't really want that for my life, right? It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know. There's crows in the side yard here. We saw them when we pulled up, so be crow sandwiches for y'all. But this fear, I'll get in trouble, I'll get fired, I'll ruin everything. Hello, fear. Have a seat. Next to judgment, next to cynicism, please just kind of like chill out, and it'll come back. It still comes back for me 8 times every day, right? Here's how to move past it, Kristen. Give us another. Here's the things that helped us. Always learn new stuff from everybody you can. Get perspectives. What does this look like from the perspective of a baby that's going to be born in the year 2030? What would they want me to do now? Powerful question. That's why the family projects are so great for us. What does this look like from a family's perspective? They said, well, our IEP tells us, or our early intervention team told us, and we started to realize that they were just launched right into our world from the get-go. Powerful learning. Prototypes, try it out. It might not work. Try something else out. Keep trying. Allied mentors. We had people that were like biased. We didn't want unbiased mentors. We wanted people that were like, yes, do it, burn it down, go. Because we needed that courage, because we already had all that fear. So if I would have had unbiased mentors, they'd be like, well, I don't know, Tim. I think you should play it safe, you know? All of a sudden you're at a point where you're like, gosh, that's what I was thinking. You're right. That's what I'm going to do, right? So you need some biased mentors that give you a little bit of, and ass kickers. Sorry, it's in nice font. But it's like you need people that are courageous, people that are like, I am ready to change the world. They are great allies for you. People that are also left out of the world and have something to say about social justice. They were terrific for us. Artists were always great for us, right? Political activists, community builders, like people that wanted to live off the grid and raise honeybees. Those were terrific partners because they wanted the world to be different too. And they could see how we did as well. Leadership was critical. We had to make hard decisions. We had a conversational culture, which it was always like, hey, what do you think about that? I don't know. What do you think about it? Yes, that's a new perspective. I never thought about it that way. And storytelling. These are the quick wins. One story got us momentum to 2, got us momentum to 7, got us momentum to 20 every single year. And that's how we started to build that. And then lastly, take a long horizon. Like, I think I got 4 O's in there. That's a long horizon. 4 or 5, 4. This might take the rest of your life. I think that's worth working on. That's our career, right? Because we could be the people that spend our careers shifting this. Next, please. So that's how it kind of looks, is this way, like the whole thing together.
I feel like the biggest thing that I've taken from it is you really have to step out of your comfort zone. It's all about comfortability. It's so easy to keep doing the same thing you've done.
Oh my
Because you
gosh.
just feel fine.
That's the top of the U right here. This is why. Because you don't have to change. You don't have to even do any of this. And you don't have to do any of this. You just got to stay right here and everything's going to be fine. Right? But you're just downloading. And the future is going to come. People will be like, why didn't anybody do anything about that? Do you want the truth? Because all of us were comfortable. And I think, this is just me, I think that I in particular had a lot of power and privilege to stay comfortable. The system served me. And so I had to say, what price am I asking human beings with disabilities to pay for my comfort? And do you know what I was asking them to pay? With their life. They were missing their purpose. They were missing their life because of my comfort. Bridget's going to hand you out 2 colors, Post-it notes.
Yes. And take one of each and pass it down.
The green one, I made you an awesome poster over here. The green one is what in your work or in your, yeah, let's stick it to your work. What in your work do you want to bring forth or give birth to? Green, for growth, okay? On the blue one, we're gonna put it over here. What in your work wants to die? What are you letting go of? Now, don't put your names on these, okay? It's okay. These are personal and private. And you go up here, and when you're done, stick them up here. And if you're on Zoom, you can put that in the chat and Kristen can put it up there for you, or I can. And then we've got a survey for you in case you want to give us critiques on our fashion choice or description of squirrel sandwiches.
You don't mind not gonna reference it. Sam, did you get a number? You brought it.
Didn't get a number.
Thanks.
I don't, that's all right.
How are they? Be quiet.
Are we putting ours down here or up here?
Down at the bottom.
All right.
Because you're still bringing forth. You gotta remember, you're not there yet. These are just baby ideas.
All right, Tim, I
You
got
just
it.
started. Don't be too ambitious,
I
man.
didn't see that.
And you're still letting go. It's funny, is like, Otto kind of talks about the top part, but I put the bottom part on there. Because I really do believe the things that you bring forth have been bubbling up for years. You just didn't know it or you couldn't name it. And I really think that even after you make decisions to let go of things, it'll be years before you move past them. I still hold plenty of lessons and treasures from things that we've moved beyond.
Kristen, you want to draw some numbers or are you listening?
Absolutely.
Or I can do it too. She's so busy.
Right.
Got number 5. Number 5?
Number 5. Josh. All right.
Yeah, there's not that many today. We had a little more like.
Number 6.
Guys, I've never won anything, ever. We don't have a list.
Oh, that's good to
Well,
know.
you'll be able
I
to
won't get Chick-fil-A.
buy a lot of Starbucks with $165,000.
I sure will, buy a Starbucks.
Number 4. Number 4.
Oh, that's true.
All right, who got number 1? All right.
I got one more to give
One
them
more. All right, one more. Number 3.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, double.
Double.
All righty.
Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Just a couple things before we conclude. So September 27th will be our next meeting. We have Superintendent David Uhl will be presenting on Leadership Part 2, and Jenna Traeger will be presenting on Coaching Model of Support. Rachel has a little announcement she's going to share with us, but I want to remind everyone that in the room, if you have not signed in, please do. That is how you will get your certificate for attending today's presentation. I'd like to thank you all for being here. Rachel, take it away.
Okay, so